Jaden, 23 years old, trudged heavily onto the bus after a tiring day of work. His whole body ached after 8 hours of hard work amid piles of machinery and factory waste. Jaden just wanted to find a place to sit and take a nap. Luckily, he found an empty seat on a crowded bus during rush hour. Sitting down, Jaden was lost in thought. The hard work, domineering boss and pressure of life made him feel exhausted and hopeless. How long can he continue doing this job? Suddenly, the bus stopped. An old woman walked up with a cane, her whole body shaking from age and fatigue. Looking at the old woman struggling to find a seat, Jaden suddenly felt sad. Without thinking much, he quickly stood up and made room for her. The old woman looked at Jaden gratefully and smiled, "Thank you. You are so kind." Jaden returned the smile, "It's okay. I just want to help you." The bus continued to roll. Jaden looked out the window, lost in confused thoughts. Suddenly, the old woman gently touched his shoulder and gave him a piece of paper. Jaden looked at the paper in surprise, filled with curiosity. "Please keep this paper," the old woman said in a weak voice. "It will change your life." Having finished speaking, the old woman closed her eyes and fell asleep. Jaden looked at the old woman, feeling sad. What secret does this piece of paper contain? Where will it lead you? Jaden carefully put the paper in his pocket. Countless questions appeared in his mind. "Grandma, please sit here," Jaden called out to the old woman. The old woman looked at Jaden in surprise, unable to believe that in the midst of a bustling crowd, there was someone willing to give up their seat for her. She smiled kindly and limped to her seat. Jaden carefully helped her sit down and stand the rest of the way. 3 minutes later, Jaden arrived at the bus stop and waved to the driver to slow down. When he got into the car, an old woman's weak hand grabbed his coat. The old woman turned to Jaden with surprise, then quietly stuffed a piece of paper into his pocket. Before he could ask the old woman about the paper, Jaden was pushed out of the car by a crowd of people. The bus drove away. Jaden still felt confused and curious. Why did the old woman leave the note for him? Is it a thank you or does it contain some mystery? Jaden rushed home, eager to find out the meaning of the mysterious piece of paper. He showered quickly and tried to fall asleep but couldn't. The image of the old woman and the note kept appearing in his mind. Jaden looked closely at the paper. On it, a street address was scrawled along with the number, Queen Spark code 88687. This line made Jaden even more confused. What is it? Code? Secret address? After a moment of thinking, Jaden folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He decided to learn about this address tomorrow. Sleep still eludes Jaden. He couldn't dispel his curiosity and worry. Where will this address lead you? Does the old woman have any intention when giving him this mysterious paper? That night, Jaden couldn't sleep. The image of the old woman and the mysterious piece of paper kept appearing in his mind. He could not explain why the old woman gave him this paper, and what secret the address contained on it contained. The next day, Jaden boarded the bus hoping to see the old woman again and ask about the paper. However, the old woman did not appear. Disappointment overwhelmed Jaden, his curiosity and confusion heightened. He wondered what message the old woman was trying to convey, and what the mysterious numbers on the paper meant. The next 2 days, Jaden spent all his time thinking about this mystery. His curiosity had piqued. Finally, he decided to go to the address listed on the paper on his day off. On Friday, instead of spending time doing laundry as usual, Jaden got on the bus and went to a mysterious address. After 35 minutes of travel, the bus finally arrived. Stepping out of the car, Jaden couldn't help but be surprised at the scene before him. Next to him is a large plot of land, surrounded by dense trees and wild gardens. The entire surrounding area was unusually quiet, with only the sound of birds chirping in the trees. Jaden carefully observed his surroundings, watching out for potential danger. After confirming his safety, he headed towards the large gate. No one answered when knocking on the door, which is understandable because there was no doorbell and the house was located far from the gate. Jaden looked inside through the gap in the gate and noticed a small panel next to the central lock. He opened the panel and saw a small screen. Jaden entered the mysterious number into the screen, and the gate in front of him slowly opened. Stepping inside, he was overwhelmed by the scene that appeared before his eyes. A magnificent mansion hidden in the middle of a large garden, like coming out of a fairy tale. Jaden walked towards the mansion, hoping to find a solution to the mystery. When he reached the front door, he turned the handle and the door opened easily. Stepping inside, he was overwhelmed by the elegance and splendor of the living room. And then, he saw the old woman. The old woman on the bus, now sitting on a comfortable sofa, greeted him with a bright smile. "Jaden, you're here." The old woman spoke, her voice warm and gentle. Jaden was so surprised that he couldn't speak. "I can't believe this is true. The mysterious old woman on the bus is the owner of this magnificent mansion. Are you the owner of this place?" Jaden stuttered and asked. The old woman nodded. "That's right, nephew. You can call me Jasmine." Jaden became even more confused. So why did the old woman get on the bus? Why does she need your help? Seeing the curiosity in Jaden's eyes, Mrs. Jasmine smiled and explained, "I just came back from a medical checkup and couldn't take a taxi home. At that time, I saw you on the bus and knew that you were a kind person. I believe you will help me." Jaden felt touched by Jasmine's words. He could not refuse the request of an elderly woman who needed help. Mrs. Jasmine offered Jaden a drink, but he refused. He wanted to know the real reason Jasmine brought him here. Mrs. Jasmine cleared her throat, her expression became serious. "Jaden, you need someone to take care of you. You are sick and at your age, you cannot do everything around the house by yourself. Your health is getting weaker and weaker." Mrs. Jasmine stopped, her eyes filled with sadness. Jaden understood what she meant. She needed someone to help her in her final days. Hearing Mrs. Jasmine's suggestion, Jaden was stunned. The salary she offered was 6 times higher than his current job, which was a dream come true. Immediately, all of Jaden's worries disappeared. He happily accepted and began to envision a bright future ahead. Mrs. Jasmine also seemed extremely satisfied. In the past 4 years, she has hired 7 caregivers, but most of them either scammed or quit mid-career because they were too tired. Looking at Jaden's sincere eyes and kindness, she knew she had found the right person. However, Jaden still has some personal matters to deal with before starting his new job. Mrs. Jasmine happily agreed and said goodbye to him with a gentle smile. Stepping out of the magnificent mansion, Jaden felt nervous. He thought about his new job, the upcoming challenges, and the mystery of why Mrs. Jasmine chose to live alone in the large house. Mrs. Jasmine is a cheerful and kind woman. Jaden believes he will like this job. The next day, Jaden went to the factory and submitted his resignation. His boss, who had been belittling and scolding him all this time, appeared extremely surprised. He even offered to double his salary to retain Jaden. Jaden secretly smiled. The boss had no idea that he had a much better job. Politely declining the offer, Jaden walked out of the factory feeling relieved and excited. 2 days later, Jaden officially started a new job at Mrs. Jasmine's house. However, things did not go as he expected. Jaden's job at Mrs. Jasmine's house is quite simple. Every morning, he wakes up early and prepares breakfast for her. He made sure she took her medicine on time and helped her do light exercise. After completing housework, Jaden often spends time watching his favorite TV show or reading books. Mrs. Jasmine often sleeps a lot during the day. When she woke up, they would talk together. Mrs. Jasmine is an intelligent and witty woman. She has many interesting stories to tell about her life. Jaden listened passionately to her stories, learning many things from her rich experiences. In the evening, Jaden cooks dinner for Mrs. Jasmine. He always made sure that she had a delicious and nutritious meal. After dinner, they often watch movies or chat together until Jasmine goes to bed. Gradually, Jaden became more and more attached to Mrs. Jasmine. Her house became his second home. He no longer sees taking care of her as a job, but as a responsibility and a joy. Mrs. Jasmine loves Scotch eggs. Every morning, Jaden takes time to make this favorite dish for his grandmother. He is also willing to help her with everything around the house, from washing and cleaning to repairing furniture. However, Ms. Jasmine's health became increasingly weaker. She could barely move and her breathing became more difficult. Jaden worries about her and is always by her side to take care of her. Early one morning, when Jaden entered the living room, he saw Mrs. Jasmine having severe difficulty breathing. He panicked and called an ambulance and took her to the hospital. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed Ms. Jasmine with heart failure. She needed urgent treatment. Jaden stayed by her side throughout her treatment, worrying and praying for her quick recovery. At the hospital, Ms. Jasmine was given intravenous fluids and the doctor prescribed some medications for her. Jaden felt lucky to have arrived early that morning. Anxiety filled his heart as he stood next to her. He held her hand and prayed for her safety. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Jasmine woke up. Looking at Jaden, she smiled and thanked him for being by her side. Jaden just said he was doing his job, but deep down he knew it was more than that. That evening, Mrs. Jasmine was discharged from the hospital. They took a taxi home. When he arrived, Jaden prepared scrambled eggs for her to eat. After eating, he led her into the room and watched her fall asleep under a thick blanket. It was late. Mrs. Jasmine wished Jaden good night. However, Jaden has no intention of leaving. Still in shock after what had just happened, he knew that if he had arrived 20 minutes later, Mrs. Jasmine might not have survived. Therefore, he did not want to leave her, did not want to leave any chance for danger. There were 3 empty bedrooms in the house. Jaden decided to sleep in one of them. Mrs. Jasmine once again thanked him for everything, but reminded him that it was late and he needed to go home. Jaden insisted on staying, wished her good night and went to one of the empty bedrooms. Little did he know that this decision would lead to unpredictable consequences. A few minutes after midnight, Jaden was awakened by a strange sound. He got up and checked on Mrs. Jasmine, but she was still sleeping soundly and nothing seemed unusual. Jaden returned to his room, but once again, he heard that sound. This time, it sounded like someone was punching a keyhole. Jaden tried to shake off his worried thoughts. There was a high fence outside, and he believed that no one could break into the house. However, that sound kept ringing, making him unable to feel at ease. Jaden reassured himself that the sound was just the wind or wild animals. The house is equipped with a modern security system, enough to prevent intruders. The house gate is also locked with a password, making breaking in even more difficult. He lay down on the bed and fell asleep. A few minutes later, a piercing scream rang out, waking Jaden from his sleep. Jumping out of bed, he rushed into Mrs. Jasmine's room. The scene before his eyes terrified Jaden. A masked man was pointing a gun at Ms. Jasmine, demanding money and jewelry. Jaden's first thought was that Mrs. Jasmine was too weak to endure this shock. He rushed at the intruder, acting with the instincts of a man used to doing heavy, dangerous work. His reflexes are quick and accurate. Jaden quickly disarmed the intruder, causing him to fall backwards onto the floor. The intruder was extremely surprised by Jaden's appearance. He thought Jasmine was home alone. He never saw Jaden until he kicked the gun out of his hand. Understanding that it was necessary to defeat Jaden to escape, the intruder rushed to attack. A fierce fight took place. Jaden was a better fighter, and he quickly knocked the intruder to the floor. However, the intruder still did not give up. While Mrs. Jasmine was calling for help, he suddenly pulled out a small knife and stabbed Jaden in the stomach before jumping out through the window. Although the knife was small, the wound was quite serious. Jaden needed urgent medical attention. If not treated promptly, his condition could become critical. When the ambulance arrived, Jaden was taken to the hospital. During Jaden's hospitalization, Mrs. Jasmine was always by his side, showing deep loyalty and care. After being taken to the hospital, Jaden was bandaged by doctors and cared for diligently until he recovered. When discharged from the hospital, Mrs. Jasmine advised him to rest at home for a few days before continuing to work. However, Jaden could not safely leave her alone, fearing that something worse could happen. Jaden continues to work and spends all his time taking care of Jasmine. They talked more, and Jaden told her about his mother. His father passed away, and now he only has his mother and a younger sister living in another city. His mother was diagnosed with leukemia and needed a bone marrow transplant. Their family had saved money for the surgery, but it still wasn't enough. Upon hearing this news, Mrs. Jasmine reassured Jaden that everything would be fine. "You are young and your future is promising, so you shouldn't worry." However, Mrs. Jasmine's health became increasingly weaker, to the point where she no longer responded to the medicine. Jaden panicked and called an ambulance and took her to the hospital. At the hospital, doctors tried their best to cure Jasmine, but her cells continued to die. Doctors had to give up on this case. Jaden couldn't accept that. He is a person who always believes in miracles, and he cannot lose Jasmine, the woman who has become an important part of his life in recent years. Beside his hospital bed, Jaden begged Jasmine to fight for his life. He continuously held her hand, urging her to be strong. Mrs. Jasmine lay on the hospital bed, too weak to move. She reflects on her life with deep gratitude. Jaden was one of the kindest people she had ever met in her life. The universe gave Mrs. Jasmine this precious gift in her final moments of life. As dusk fell, she once again advised Jaden to go home. She wanted him to return to his biological mother, believing that she would be fine. However, Jaden was determined to stay. He couldn't leave her right now, no matter where his mother was. Throughout the night, Jaden stayed by Jasmine's side, listening to her voice, which was now so weak that it was only a whisper. She repeatedly thanked him for everything, until she fell into complete silence. A few hours before dawn, the beeping from the monitor also fell silent. Jaden screamed in pain, unable to believe what had happened. When the doctors entered the room, Jaden begged them to save Mrs. Jasmine. But the doctor only announced that she passed away at 4:20 a.m. Her body has been prepared for burial. Jaden was stunned, unable to believe this cruel truth. He fell into a state of shock and remained motionless for several minutes. His benefactor and friend were gone forever. The pain of loss weighed on Jaden like a 1,000-pound burden. Mrs. Jasmine is not only a friend, but also a woman he loves like a grandmother. The pain made his heart stop beating, almost leading to heart failure. Tears flowed endlessly down his face, pain tearing at his heart. Many days later, Jaden was still immersed in sadness. He cried so much that his eyes were swollen and he lost his voice. Returning home, he couldn't sleep because the image of Jasmine was always in his mind. He wished if life wasn't so cruel. It took more than 3 years for Jaden to gradually recover from his sadness. During those days, he was with his mother, who was always by his side to comfort and encourage him. A week after Mrs. Jasmine passed away, she was buried at the cemetery. Standing in front of her grave, Jaden choked up and said, "You will always be in my heart." After stabilizing his mind, Jaden decided to return to life. He found a new job and began rebuilding his life. One day, while Jaden was at home, he heard a knock on the door. When he opened the door, he suddenly saw 3 men standing in front of him. Jaden stood outside his house in an expensive suit, feeling confused and a little wary. 3 strange men appeared at the door. One of them stepped forward and introduced himself as Ms. Jasmine's lawyer. Then he said something that completely astonished Jaden. Mrs. Jasmine had left all her assets and businesses, including investments, to Jaden. Jaden was stunned, couldn't believe what he heard. He dismissed the lawyer's words as a joke. However, the lawyer gave him a stack of documents. Jaden flipped through the pages, his mouth hanging open in surprise. The truth is that Mrs. Jasmine owns a huge fortune. She is a millionaire, owning shares in many leading companies. She has built a successful business career since she was just 30 years old. When she had money, she started buying real estate and put all her energy into her business. She has never been married. At the age of 40, she founded a children's charity foundation and owns several houses for humanitarian purposes. After Jaden saved her life from an intruder a few weeks ago, she informed her lawyer of her desire to transfer all of her assets to Jaden upon her death. Thanks to that, Jaden suddenly became a millionaire. He was extremely touched and grateful for the precious legacy that Mrs. Jasmine gave him. Thanks to his kindness and dedication to taking care of her in the last months of her life, he was rewarded handsomely. With this huge amount of money, Jaden can now afford to pay for his mother's bone marrow transplant surgery, something he could not do before due to lack of finances. Jaden's kindness and compassion brought him a priceless gift, a rich life and the opportunity to help those around him. Jaden's story is a testament to the power of kindness and the reward for noble deeds.